And we are going to cover just a few things with you. The intent is to kind of mimic what would happen in the event of a virtual environment if you were ever faced in the situation where you are now going from an in class to a virtual world. To make that transition as seamless as possible, we want to give you guys some tips on how to for that to happen. So the first thing we're going to touch on is just talking a little bit about Google Meet. Now, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Google Meet because during the learn at home time, everybody, I'm sure at some point, has connected via Google Meet. Well, the intent today is to kind of share some tips with you when you're using Google Meet with your students. I'm sharing my screen just so you can see what I'm going to walk you through, but you see there's a couple things along the bottom. So your Google Meet is going to be your new classroom. So just like you do in a classroom setting, you are going to set up norms as if, the students were in class. So your norms are going to be a little different. So along the bottom, I just want to share with you a couple of things here. You've got your microphone. So, just how kids are not yelling out in class, they have to raise their hand. You might want them to mute their mics when they're not speaking. That is just a standard norm for anybody, just so you know, because if you're in a virtual environment, kids are at home, you might hear some crying, you might hear some dog barking, you might hear, whatever, the phone ringing, the TV going, whatever the case may be. So you might want your students to mute their mic. Okay. And then the other thing is the camera, the video, which you guys have turned off, so you know how that functions. One of the newest features is this raise hand feature, which is great. So now when I click on the raised hand, you can see that beside my little picture there is my hand is up. Okay. And then there's a lower, it's kind of a toggle, right? You raise it and you lower your hand. So just like in the classroom, when students want to speak, they have to raise their hand and wait their turn. Same thing in this Google Meet. So that's kind of a norm that you want to set up with your students in the event that you are in this situation. And it doesn't have to be that we are going from, a complete lockdown back to a learn at home type model, but it could be, there might be a reason why, for a week or so, there might be students that are having to learn from home. So it might be that situation as well. Okay. So we have the raised hand. We have the captions that you can turn on as well. So you can see with the turning the captions on, you can see now that when I'm speaking, that all of the words that I'm saying are coming up across the screen. Okay, I'm going to turn that off as well. One of the big things that you're going to be doing is when you're, like you have your smart board up in the screen, up on the front of your classroom, you have something displayed on that smart board. You may want to present something as well. So in this case, right now, I'm presenting my screen to you, which is only really the Google Meet screen, so you can see all the options that I'm going through. But I might have a video or a document that I want to share with the students, at which point I would click on I'm just going to click on here if I wanted to. I want to, if I stop presenting, it's going to share. But if you click on your present option, what'll happen is if I wanted to present something, it would come up and it'd say, okay, do you want to present a tab? Do you want to present a window, or do you want to present your whole screen? Okay, so in this case, all I'm doing is I'm presenting a window. So, and what happens is when you select one of those options, you will have a list of whatever tabs you have open. If you pick tab, whatever windows you have open, if you pick windows, and then you click on that particular window. You can view your whole screen as well if you're going to be switching between different things. Okay, so that's just the option. And that's one thing that you will likely be sharing with your students quite regularly if you are in a virtual environment. The three dots along the right side of that are additional options that you have. And I'm going to just take you through a couple of the things. So one of the things, hopefully, if you've got younger grades, I forgot to ask you guys what grades you are teaching, but if you have younger grades, for instance, you may decide that this may not be an issue. But in the case of, these are host controls. So basically, these are controls that as the facilitator or the owner of the meeting have access to. And so if you have, and we've heard this from some virtual teachers, where there is the chat feature. Let me just close that for a second. In here, you have this chat feature, right? So you can have the students asking questions. But if it gets to be a little bit out of control, what you can do is you can stop that chat feature from happening. So in the settings, there's a couple of places to do it. Host controls. So you can have the ability, you can block the ability for students to share their screens, or you can also block the ability for the students to be able to send a chat during it. It might be disruptive. That's up to you, but you can manage that by toggling that on or off. Okay, so you can control that. There's just one other way that I'm going to show you how to do that. And these are, again, just norms that you may want to set up with your students, or it might just be that you set up those norms ahead of time to say, okay, when we're presenting, we're not chatting, or when we're presenting, we are chatting, that kind of thing. Um, the other way to do that very quickly is just to click on the people here, and then you can see the host controls is there. In addition to removing the chat and removing the ability to take control of your screen, you also, now I'm the presenter, so you can see my screen. Um, you can see here these three dots beside Liz's name. So if Liz decides to get rowdy in this and we cannot control her in any way, we can just remove her right from the meeting and we can kick her out of the meeting. And maybe she'll get back to control. But if you do have students that are in that situation, then here's where you would kind of take that opportunity to remove them. One other kind of neat feature in here while we're here is when you're adding people to your Meet. So a lot of parents or a lot of people did this or teachers did this, and maybe you won't, maybe you guys did this already, but you have an ability to add people to your meeting when I click on the add button. And now instead of using the invite through email, you can also make a phone call. So a lot of teachers were using this for parent teacher interviews so that they didn't have to block their phones using their cell phones. You can actually make your call over the Wi-Fi using a phone number. So you would put in the phone number that you wanted, and then it would dial that number and you would be having a conversation with that individual. They wouldn't see you, they would just hear you, but you can make that phone call that way as well. Another thing is the layout. It's kind of important as well. So depending on how many students you have in your class, right now you can set it to auto, you can set it to tiled, but maybe you have 15 kids in your class, so you don't want to see 9, you want to see all your kids, and then you would adjust it and see your tiles that way. Okay, so you'd see every little kind of thumbnail of all your students. Okay, but there's different layouts that you can use. And this is really, again, these are just things that you want to set up for yourself to make it easier for you as the facilitator, as the educator, to be able to see your students and manage this environment. Okay. The only other thing that I'm going to show you is this whiteboard. I don't know if you guys have used this whiteboard feature, but it is start a new whiteboard. It is absolutely just like using a smart board. So you can have all your students come in and collaborate. There's Justin. Justin is in. So you could do little group things, or you could do it as a whole with your class. But it's just like using um, a smart board. And the other thing is that you can actually create these ahead of time. So you could have had one that you'd been working on and you maybe want to open it up. So you can see that when we actually first opened up Jamboard, it said you want to create a new one, or do you want to open up an existing one? And as I mentioned, where you go to the waffle, just in the regular Google Apps, the 9 dots, if you scroll down, there is a Jamboard icon in your list of apps there. And so you can open it up there and you can create stuff there. Typically in the classroom, you've got the pods, you've got the kids working at tables maybe, so you're moving from table to table. In a virtual environment, um, in order for your students to collaborate or even have those face-to-face discussions, you're going to want to create multiple Google Meets for those students so that they can go and break out into these, what we're calling breakout rooms. So what we suggest is that you don't need to be in every room at the same time, right? You don't need to have them all open and in kind of connected to every one of them. So the intent would be that, say you have 4 breakout rooms set up for your students, okay? And you might have 5 in one, 6 in the other, whatever the case may be. In those breakout rooms, what you would do is you could create a Google Meet link for those particular students. And so in doing so, you would have access to all those different links. But when you join a Meet, you join one at a time. These PCs, these computers, any computer really is not equipped to handle the resource. They're resource intensive, so they're not equipped to handle that resource to have you in every single Meet at one time. So we had some virtual teachers that thought, you know what, I need to be able to see all my students all the time when they are working independently as a like in their own little groups. So what we suggest is that if you want to check in on them, you go into that Google link, you join that Meet, then you come out of it, you join the next Meet, and then you come out of it. But you cannot really be in every Meet simultaneously.
What we're going to do now is we're going to take the information that we learned with Carolyn about how Google Meet works, and we're going to talk about the difference to a Google Classroom that you've run in your classroom versus doing it from another site, possibly your home. First, let's look at a Google Classroom that I've created just as a template to show one of the new additions, and hopefully everybody can see this now, that was in Google Classroom since September has been this Meet link. Everybody is able to see my screen right now? Okay, good. This Meet link here was not there previous to the 2020-2021 school year. As you can tell, that this little I means it's not visible to students. This allows us to not have to set up a Google Meet for our classroom. What it allows us to do is we turn this on, and then we ask our students to navigate to the Meet at the top of their Google Classroom. So right now they can't see it. I'm going to show you how to turn it on. You can click the gear in the top right corner, which is our settings gear. Open that up, and we're going to scroll down until we see the Meet icon. This toggle allows us to turn that on. So I'm going to turn it on right now. Then I'm going to save that. When I do that, it brings us back to our Google Classroom, and now we have a different icon here. This means that this is viewable. This link would be now accessible by all the students in the classroom. So when you're navigating your classroom from home, possibly, you're asking students to click that Meet link for whatever time you're asking them. So you might say something like, students, we're going to meet at, or hello class, we're going to meet at 9 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock, you're going to open that Google Meet. So if it's 9 o'clock, I'm going to click this link, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. It looks just the same as it would if you were entering a Google Meet. This is what the students see. It's just getting ready to load up here. But once it loads, it is identical to what we would have done to join. That's it. So that's pretty basic, but what I'm going to show you, there's a couple best practices around this. One of the best practices is to not to leave that link open, to not have it always visible for your students. When you're done for the day, you turn it off, and when you start the day up again, you turn it on, because you're going to find out throughout the day, you're going to use it, and sometimes you're not. We're going to talk about when you might use it and when you won't here in a minute, because what's a little different, and I think the perception before was that we're not on all the time. You're not sitting in front of a Google Meet from 9 till 3:30 every day. That's just not realistic, and it's not something that we're required by the ministry to do. So in our Google Meet link, this is another feature you can do. This random amount of characters here is what the link to get in was. You can always reset that. Once you've reset it, it'll change to something else, and now the previous one, they cannot use that link if they've saved the link. However, if they are still in it, and maybe Carolyn highlighted that for a minute, I just stepped out for a second, but if they are still in it, you want to make sure that you're the last person in your Google Meet. You do have the option to remove people, because I remember I think someone in our group was getting rowdy and Carolyn was threatening to give them the boot. You want to make sure that you tell everybody to leave. Typically teachers are fine and they have 2 or 3 kids that are remaining in the classroom. So they are saying, hey, just a heads up, by 11:59, this Meet is closing. And then you just individually go to those students and give them the boot. You close it, and then you can come in here and change this link. You can turn, and then once it's changed, the other one is deactivated, and you can turn it off. So when I go to save, go back, and now while I still have that Meet link there, if I want to go and look at it, it's not available to students. And you'll notice that by the I with the slash in it says not visible to students. The difference between synchronous and asynchronous teaching. These might not be familiar terms right now. We heard a lot about this earlier in the year and then a little bit at the end of last year. But the idea here is that our synchronous time is the time we're spending one-to-one with our students and our classroom. So it's most of the time you're doing now in the classroom. When we think of the example I use to think about the difference between synchronous and asynchronous would be if we're doing our 3-part math lesson. The 2 first parts of that math lesson are our synchronous blocks. Sometimes we move into okay, I want everybody to go do that independent work. That's where it's asynchronous. But that lesson can kind of fall between 2, because you can have those students going and working independently. If you're available, and some students you might have, in the classroom, you have 4 or 5 students that come to see you to work on that lesson. They are going to be, that becomes a synchronous lesson now. If you're available to react, instantly in time, it's now synchronous. Asynchronous is, you might be getting back to them. You're not exactly right there and ready to answer that question. So if we look at the examples in this slide, the synchronous examples would be running a Google Meet. That's the big one. But you can also have synchronous examples that aren't that. Like we looked at Jamboard already today. We can be having a conversation with students over Google Chat. We can simply have our slide deck that we're utilizing today. You might do that over synchronously. It's a time when you're saying to the students that you're available. The asynchronous examples, though, can be one of the examples we have here is a learning partner. So you might set a group of students to work on something together. You set them up, they're working on that together. Independent work is the big player in asynchronous learning. So it's something that you've taught a lesson, you now assign them work, they're going to do that, then they're going to come back to you in a synchronous time to complete that work.
In the tech-in section for the synchronous component, if you are in a true virtual environment where you are going to be teaching fully, we would recommend that you're doing a tech-in, what we're calling a tech-in, every day with your students. So that is, maybe you're doing from 9 to 9:30. It is mandatory that your students are connecting with you as a group so that you can do your things like your attendance. Maybe you're doing your prayers together. Maybe you're just doing show and tell. I don't know what the case may be, but that is kind of that tech in, that norm that you would do as you do your attendance on a regular basis. So there might be a time where it is, in fact, a dedicated time that you set up to check in every morning. Okay.
And that's a great example of what synchronous learning is. So that's one of those time periods that you would be synchronously working with the students in your classroom.
I am going to just take you to our website. The important thing about the virtual environment and in any environment, today that you have access to a lot of resources, whether it's through our learning technology specialists or whether it's through the consultants at the Ed Center. You have support that's available to you. What I do want to show you now, as soon as I get it up on the screen, I'm going to take you to our learning technologies website. I'm hoping that you guys are all familiar with this wonderful resource. So I'm sharing the Learning Technologies website. The reason why I wanted to share that with you is because there are some multimedia resources that are available, and that's just to get to our website. It's LT for Learning Technologies .pvnccdsb.on.ca. Under our multimedia tab, we have done some Google Classroom, some Google Slide when we did some learning at home videos during the Learn at Home time. So there are some resources available. This one is actually, the Google Classroom one is an actual video where we had about 70 or 80 people in the session. And so asking some questions. So if you're not familiar with some certain parts of it, these are actual live PVNC staff. The other thing that I wanted to show you was, if we go back to the home screen for a second, we had created, as part of the Learn at Home and then blended document, so we have for in-school teachers, and then we have for the virtual school, and then we have support for the virtual support staff virtual document as well. In particular for you guys right now, this for in-school teachers, this is a document that was prepared, and basically what it is a learning guide to a blended learning environment within PVNC. So it covers things like, what is blended learning? Here are some applications that you can use and what the tools are used for. So for instance, if you wanted to create a podcast, there's Audacity for that, and you can click on the link, it will take you there. So it kind of gives you some ideas in a blended environment, how you might want to use some of these applications. Grades for blended learning considerations. So what that might look like as an educator at these age groups, okay, or these grades. So there's some options there. It is a great resource, and as I've shown you where it is, you can find it on our website. Um, Personalized learning. So just when you have some, we've built in the Catholic graduate expectations into this as well. So just some ideas for you to take a look at in a blended environment. The intent for you is to know that you guys have a ton of resources, whether it's individuals, whether there's links to great resources as well that are available for you.